This study claims that on the keto diet, high cholesterol is safe. But did they bury data?
This is a gross manipulation of data. I'm sorry, but this study is an absolute joke.
And really, this story is rife with scandal, even between the authors, where some seem to be going around the other one's back.
All right, well, he's not allowed to do that.
And people are having to just squeeze the actual data out of these authors, which is wild. I've never seen this before. And then it's also really just a masterclass in grifting in terms of how they're spinning this study, or not just in terms of mainstream media, but also in terms of course, like carnivore influencers they're talking to.
This new study is literally going viral. It's about cholesterol and heart disease.
LDL and ApoB did not predict plaque progression.
Now help me and make sure this posts far and wide so that people can start waking up.
Were the outcomes shoved under the rug? Let's see if we can expose the truth. Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. In this video, we're going to listen to Mike the Vegan. Yeah, I know, I've listened to some of his videos before. He's not for the keto diet, but that's okay. He is maybe too much for one diet, but that's okay too, I suppose. But let's see what Mike says. Now, this was going to be a first look at the lean mass hyperresponder study and all the things that happened. And by the end of the video, I'm going to bring you up to date on what the latest thinking is about this study. So hang in there till the end. Before we dive into today's video, I want to invite you to join the Academy's free webinar, The Power of Protein, Telltale Signs You Need More Protein, hosted by Dr. Michael Eads and Dr. Mary Dan Eads. They've appeared as nutritional experts on hundreds of radio and television shows across the US and continue to speak at medical and scientific conferences on the connection between diet, health, exercise, and low-carb and ketogenic diets. See the link in the description to sign up.
Hey, it's Mike here, and today a new keto heart plaque study has just come out, and I will say my predictions from 1 year ago were wrong. But forget me anyway, because we have a massive onslaught of level-headed doctors responding and saying, hey, they were hiding data from this study, not disclosing it, and really spinning a subsequent narrative that is deceptive.
This is a gross manipulation of data. I'm sorry, but this study is an absolute joke.
Yeah, well, so if you haven't been paying attention to the social media, and I have to say most of my doctor colleagues are not really talking about this study. It was a pilot study, but the background of it is that a pilot study on a very controversial issue is rarely done. And I've been I helped to fund this study, so that it was to look to see what happens to people with very high cholesterol, LDL in particular, and HDL. They both were elevated to higher levels than typically seen, and what happens to their coronary arteries. And so the first study that's not being talked about here is the baseline scans, where they had people for 3 to 5 years self-reported on a keto diet. Half of them had no coronary atherosclerosis at all. And this is not the calcium score that you might get for $20 to $300, depending where you are in the country. This is the coronary CT angiogram, which people were flown to LA, Dr. Budoff's shop, if you will, his lab, and they got research grade coronary angiograms. So it's looking at the angiogram, the coronaries themselves internally, not just the calcium score. I have to make that distinction. But so there were a lot of things that happened over the last 6 months or so since the first study came out. And I have to agree that the rollout was not very, how should I say, orchestrated. But let's remember back that this was a funded study by Dave Feldman and the Citizen Science Foundation. And I contributed, and you may have as well, in a GoFundMe to fund this study. So it was really done, what we say, on a shoestring. So what was lacking was a coordinated communications group like we have at Duke here or other universities that would say, hey, wait a minute, we're going to give a press release and here's the coordinated announcement. That didn't happen, and I was a little shocked at all the going around and talking about the data, but now I kind of understand why. I've met all of the colleagues other than Dr. Budoff. And what was missing, I think, was a senior colleague. Of course, it takes money to get a senior colleague and a communications group to say, wait a minute, let's look at what we have rather than rush to get information out. And that's going to actually play out as we go on in this video. If there was a rush to get the information out.
All right, now to the study itself, which they're calling the keto CTA trial, keto being ketogenic diet and CTA being the type of heart imaging that they did, and trial being completely inaccurate. They multiple times called it a trial, even a prospective trial, but those are all misrepresentations. This is a prospective cohort study, which is an observational study. There's no intervention here, not a trial.
The study, you can make fun of it. It was a pilot study, but they did the study. So, Mike, I'd like to see 100 people on a vegan diet sent to LA to Dr. Budoff's lab and see what happens to them. What's novel is, to my knowledge, that has never been done. No specific diet has been singled out like this to look at the effects over a year. And I learned a long time ago, I've been in this research space now for 30 years. And if you come out with novel findings, you're going to have to weather a storm, and it's going to be controversial. But you did the study, and you're going to weather the storm. There will be controversy. So in a pilot study like this, which threatens the idea that LDL always causes a problem, because actually there were people that had really high LDLs for 5 years without any angiography evidence of plaque. So the child who had familial hyperlipidemia had evidence of coronary disease by the age of 3. So that if you're going to go along that this is the LDL and nothing else is going on, all of them should have had coronary artery disease if they've had an LDL that high, and LDL is the only factor that's necessary and sufficient to cause the heart disease. So, but anyway, the journal that it's in, don't disparage that. It's there. And so let's find other diets that purport to have, I haven't even seen a Mediterranean diet study, where they took people, sent them for this super sensitive analysis. So now here's the problem. If you're the first one to show super sensitive analysis data about a particular diet, you're going to get the slings and arrows if the diet has nothing to do with the progression of the disease. And what's worse about how the study was done is they led with information that was not all that accurate. And hang on, this is very interesting as it has unfolded over the last 6 months.
So they had 100 people, and their LDL, or bad cholesterol, was an average of about 250, which is quite high, and we're talking about less than 100 being the conventional cutoff for optimal. Yet they did not have a control group to compare to, which is standard for prospective cohort studies. And in terms of the primary outcome that they reported, that they were looking for on the study, they were supposed to be looking for changes in soft plaques of the heart.
Well, so this gets to study design. And as someone who started with 50 people on an Atkins diet over 6 months, we recruited people, brought them into groups. We taught them what to do. We followed them every month in a group, took the blood, analyzed it, published it in a peer-reviewed journal 23 years ago. The first study often is uncontrolled. Our first study on the low-carb Atkins diet had no control group. The study cost doubles. Well, almost doubles if you have twice the group, twice the outcomes, twice the number of people to follow. I guess it depends what the fixed costs are. But so to do a first look, shoestring study, to have only one group, to me, is reasonable. I didn't, as a funder of this study, that didn't seem weird to me that you would just study people who are on the diet. Remember, everyone thought that if you had an LDL this high, you would die, or you would get heart disease within a matter of 2 years or 3 years. The baseline data already showed that a subset of these folks, 50% or so, had no coronary disease even after years of having super high LDLs. So this is getting interesting. You want to find the anomaly in the world. The planet planets were found to not follow the stars in the same direction. And that's what led to the discovery that the Earth was not the center of the universe or solar system, now we call it. And the church didn't like that some years ago. So hang on, when you find something new, there's going to be some rock and roll, some controversy here. And it's fine with me that this was a single arm study, whether they call it a trial or a study. I've seen anyone do it. So we're really kind of nitpicking here at the edges of the fact that nobody died over this period of time. I mean, progression of atherosclerosis, we're going to get into that. My main take-home point is at baseline, there were these people with super high LDLs. They were still alive. So remember, I'm in a clinic where you may even be one of my patients, and you ask me, what should I do? And I'm teaching you how to do a low-carb diet. You're reversing diseases and all this, and you ask me about heart disease. I need to have an answer, and I'll give you my answer at the end of the video.
This is very telling because we're talking about a group that's averaged age 55 that at baseline started at about 40 cubic millimeters of plaque volume. That means within 1 year, they had an increase of nearly half of their lifetime plaque over 55 years, which to me shows that this diet is leading to new rapid acceleration of heart disease.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop right there to kind of give, if you haven't been following the researchers talking about this, I don't blame you. If you haven't gone to the Low Carb USA meeting in San Diego to hear Dave Feldman give the update on this, I appreciate your comments if you did see it. It turns out this clearly analysis really isn't very good. And I know they published the papers, but what they were looking here at a figure like this, and where everyone had progression on this figure, and they did two other types of analyses, which take longer to do, more staff time, and they didn't find the same things. So the more accurate assessment of the atherosclerotic plaque of the coronary arteries hasn't been presented yet. And yet all these people are clucking about it. And I have to say the team presented it as if it was the done deal, like the final analysis. And Dave Feldman has talked about that, and they're apologizing, well, as they can, to say that, well, this was the fastest one that was available, so we thought we'd publish it, as opposed to taking all three different types of analyses and comparing them. And so the other issue here is there were subgroups, and I think that's what got Dr. Sotomoto off a little bit, where there was heterogeneity, meaning you can't just look at the mean. There were some people that had no progression at all, and based on the Low Carb USA presentation, again, this is not published yet, even in the Journal of American Cardiology Advances, what is not published yet. The data that were presented is that there were really kind of three groups. A third of folks had no progression even over the year. A third had some progression. A third had regression. So hang on. This is actually as a pilot study. Remember, there's a lot of I don't know, rending of clothes about this pilot study, and it isn't even all out yet. So the misstep, I think, that the team did, the study team, was to put a unvalidated, it turns out the Clearly analysis is not the gold standard for analyses, and they have a different one that's going to be presented. And that, I'm afraid, was a misstep by the investigators. They should have just, relaxed and showed the full data set if they could. Again, it's a shoestring kind of study. Who knows, they might have run out of money to get the final analyses. I don't have information to that level, but this analysis is not going to be the final one to look at. And yet we have all of the internet and social media response based on this Clearly analysis.
This is where I have to flat out just say that I was wrong, because I did a video on this a year ago when they presented their baseline data, and we already had quite a bit of drama around it. Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who we'll cover again in a second, said, I was part of the board of the study initially, but I had to leave due to ethical concerns. So with that little bit of mistrust in how this study was funded by a community of people, that generally deny the connection between LDL and heart disease, I thought there's going to be no progression in plaque. No matter what, they're going to fudge the data, do whatever they need to not have that progression.
Well, as a funder of the study, knowing the investigators themselves, they're not going to fudge the data, Mike. So you can relax about that one. Any proponent of a particular dietary approach, if you say that it's great for everyone, you have to show it. You have to prove it. I haven't been shown data on 100 vegans sent to Budoff's lab. I think that would be a great one to do. But oh wait, who's going to fund that, right? So maybe people who are sticking up for vegan diets, perhaps. I don't know why that study hasn't been. Oh, everyone knows it's the right thing to do, right? So hang on. I'm even thinking that we don't know the right diet for everyone. We don't know how to match the right diet to people perfectly. And so as I'm unfolding, listening to this, seeing data from my own patients, I'm getting to that idea that we need to measure ourselves and to know our own calcium score or whether we have progression, because a lot of it may not be diet related at all. And if you're going to blindly think you're on a certain diet and it is, the healthy one that never has a problem, then you may be not really following the root causes of the atherosclerosis. For example, if you have something like psoriasis or lupus, you have an inflammatory condition like that, you can get more atherosclerosis. So I'm actually, as a theoretical model, more intrigued about inflammation being the root cause rather than LDL being the root cause. And here, we're doing a lot of focus on LDL. No one has mentioned yet that the HDL is really high and the triglyceride was really low. So the new paradigm, not mine, it goes back to Dr. Jerry Reven at Stanford, the metabolic syndrome construct looks at HDL and triglyceride in the blood, not the LDL. And as a function, the LDL actually gets bigger and fluffy, the light fluffy LDLs, when you have the metabolic syndrome fixed. These are kind of general principles of the dietary assessment toward atherosclerosis. But metabolic syndrome also incorporates the blood glucose, the blood pressure, the abdominal circumference as well. And the LDL focus doesn't incorporate those other things.
To sum up what was covered in that interview, Dr. Budoff essentially says that the study was released before he even signed off on it, before his statistician signed off on it, and that it wasn't even the final version of the paper somehow being published.
Yeah, so this happened in my lifetime, in my career, where journals let preprints go out, and you don't have to have signed off on it. So actually that may have been a journal issue where they say, preprint not published yet. And so, again, this is not a crime to have it. It looks bad. It was disorganization. They shouldn't do that again, for sure.
The authors issued a statement shared on social media that the study will not be revised. It appears no changes will be made, and that the version currently available and discussed in this video will be the final version after all.
We don't even have the proofs yet.
Meaning no plaque numbers in a study whose primary outcome was plaque change. Now, one thing that I haven't seen anybody do, and that is just think, okay, what would these plaque numbers mean a few years down the road? Generally, with heart disease, as people age, we're kind of flat, nothing's really happening. They start to get heart disease, and then it accelerates much faster. And while participants of the study were certainly on different places on that curve, we're seeing people that are not diagnosed with heart disease. They're kind of starting on that slower, lower slope, which is almost certainly going to accelerate to a higher slope. But let's be generous and just say that it's a linear progression. And we can look to 5 years out, and we're seeing a plus 94 cubic millimeter increase in plaque volume, which brings us to 134. And of course, real fast, from a linear perspective again, in about 10 years, they're going to be at plus 188 cubic millimeters. And then they're on average, 20 years out, why not? We're talking about a chronic disease. Of the group is going to be over 400.
Yeah, so that extrapolation is pretty much meaningless. There were subgroups within the study that actually some people had regression, so that they're not going to go up. And the old saying, you can hide, to hide things in the mean and the average is true in this case. There was heterogeneity, and that's what Dr. Sotomoto was trying to explain, and it didn't come out right. Everyone wanted the perfect study with all of the answers, which is a shoestring study, pilot study. I hope this will stimulate other groups, like as a straw man, to show whether or not this is replicable. I hope this shows kind of like a straw man that this is replicable or not in other situations, other types of diet programs, with or without medication treatment. The idea that the metabolic syndrome can be anti-atherogenic and be a treatable entity is pretty solid. Although there are not randomized trials of taking people with just metabolic syndrome and putting them on a keto diet, or putting them on a diet that just addresses the medication treatment. So it is a bit of a stretch to extrapolate for any kind of diet, and that extrapolation of what happens over time reminds me of Mark Twain's extrapolations when, he said, the Mississippi River grows at this rate, and that means that in 1,000 years it's going to stretch all the way down to South America. So there's a problem with that kind of extrapolation, that if you really know that, great, but we don't know what's going to happen, and to assume that something bad is going to happen has been a recurring theme over the last 25 years for me. We present data, and at 6 months, everything looks great. People say, but what happens at 6 months and a day? We present data at a year. Well, but what happens at 1 year and a day? And so I've had the great fortune to be in a clinic where I've been following people for years with super high LDLs, and they don't have the damage and they're not dying of heart attacks. So the clinical signal from people who are in clinics with those who are having high LDLs on a keto or carnivore diet is one of relative calm. We don't get too sensational about it. We ask people to measure these things, and that's going to be my ending, that you should get these things measured if you're worried about it.
Of course it wasn't. The average LDL was 254 milligrams per deciliter. You won't find an association between LDL and plaque if everyone has sky-high LDL. That finding is meaningless without a low LDL control group, because it lacks the variability and exposure to detect a dose-response relationship.
Hang on, this made no sense to me. If everyone had high LDLs and there was no plaque, if everyone gets exposed to sun, you'll get sunburned, if sun always causes the sunburn. So, there are some people who genetically may or may not get the sunburn. And so, no, if LDL is the cause of the heart disease, you should have seen it because it was really high. In fact, the levels were as high as the little girl who started the whole familial hyperlipidemia thing. So this is a flawed criticism.
It's like trying to find a difference in lung cancer rates between those who smoke 50 versus 60 cigarettes a day. No matter how you try to spin it, the fact is these lean people with sky-high LDL following the keto diet develop plaque several times faster than healthy people, and at similar, if not worse rates than metabolically unhealthy people.
Yeah, so the analyses that are coming forth, they presented at medical meetings now, the low-carb Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners meeting, show that there are some subgroups here. Not everyone has progression. And I think that's the main point of the big picture view. Everyone thought everyone would have progression. No, the naysayers would have said everyone will have progression, of course. Well, what's also missing is, do these people have genetic susceptibility? Do they have the family history of heart disease or not? And, it may be that these folks could have eaten anything and never have gotten the heart disease. So I think we're oversimplifying the criticisms, and the idea that this is a pilot study is well taken, and it's not a huge study. That's probably why age fell out of the model. If you're into regression models, you can overfit a model, and you need 10 to 20 observations per variable, and it was pretty low in terms of doing multivariable regression. Point well taken.
But yeah, to Dr. Ids' point, if we did have people that were down in the lower, under 100, even in the vegan range of 50 to 70, we would have had a much more dramatic contrast, and maybe it could have statistically found something.
Of course, we couldn't get through a video on a keto diet without mentioning vegan, but okay, it's Mike the vegan.
Because yes, in other studies looking at the same imaging technique, we do see that LDL, as it increases, is correlated with higher plaque volume. We can look at this graphic that Dr. Anna Boric put together, and it really illustrates it and frames it well. You can see how they just isolated a clump of the distribution of real people and said, look, no association, guys. And this is where we get to another secondary outcome that they sort of pulled out and ran with to make the study look good.
Most exhibited no or minimal progression of coronary artery disease.
And I think I'll let Dr. McGowan, who has a great response to this video overall, respond first.
As when you look at their graphs, which we have to do because they wouldn't give us numbers for the primary outcome, we see that about 95% or more of the participants had progression in NCPV, the primary outcome of the study. So to report that most people had stable plaque when clearly this wasn't the case, that is incredibly deceptive.
The double entendre there is clearly analysis was not corroborated by the other analyses that are coming down the pike. So this is kind of a timestamp on that first study result, that now other results will be presented that are thought to be more reliable.
So in terms of super high LDL, I can't help but think of this very obvious analogy where you are maybe like a fireman in a fireproof suit who has to run through a field of razor blades that is life, where it's cutting tiny holes in your suit. Would you rather have people shooting at you with flamethrowers or holding up lighters to you? Because that's essentially what's going on. Because as soon as you get that first cut from a razor blade due to whatever it was in your life, you don't want to be gassed with the flamethrower. You don't want to be gassed with 250 or higher LDL. You want to be down to that tiny little flame of 50 to 70 LDL if possible, but definitely under 100. And this is where Nick said something that I just had to laugh at on Metabolic Mind.
Has the message been, it is safe to be a lean mass hyperresponder, as demonstrated by this study? I mean, I think that's probably one of the concerns that some people think they are hearing or others are saying. So with you as an individual, I mean, is that what you interpret from the study?
For me as an individual, I think I take the data within the context of my own case. My case is I have a 0 plaque score on coronary CT angiography.
Dude, this guy is in his 20s. He is a young dude. The amount of people that are going to have plaque progression after a few years on high LDL is low. But the fact that he also just has to get scans to make sure that his heart isn't clogging on his diet should be enough to kind of tell you that it's not the best diet out there.
Well, let me give a clinical doctor perspective on that. Actually, people can have coronary artery disease and follow a vegan diet. Yeah, people can actually have coronary artery disease and follow a keto diet or a Mediterranean diet. There are other factors involved to cause the coronary artery disease. I think the promoters of certain diets overplay the relationship and the potency of whatever they're proselytizing and preaching, the power that it has. So my take-home point, and I learned it even before the lean mass hyperresponder, the keto CTA study, if you will, was published, is that you need to measure yourself. And the methodology, the techniques are there now, and you can maybe have to pay for getting that information. So I've seen people on any kind of diet have coronary atherosclerosis, and the idea of predicting it by just the diet that you're doing is not sufficient.
And again, with the smoking here, where it's like, okay, if he was smoking, where only 10% of people who smoke end up getting lung cancer, someone in their 20s saying, look, I smoke, I don't have lung disease. Smoking doesn't cause lung cancer or lung disease. Look at me, you know, like, come on. And this is where I want to just give a little bit of information about the funding of the study. This was done by the Citizen Science Foundation. I believe it was started by Dave Feldman, one of the co-authors, who has the Cholesterol Code website, which is really a cholesterol denial website, denying the connection between LDL cholesterol and heart disease. And what this organization and Nick on social media does as well is they really have a following of people that really don't want high LDL to cause heart disease. They're carnivore, they're keto, they're low carb in some way, and their LDL is too damn high. And their doctor's like, you should do something about this. And they're like, I don't want to. Tell me some good news about my bad habits.
Did you hear that? Tell me some good news about my bad habits. Boy. I had a friend years ago who worked at Loma Linda University, and I asked her if they had a coronary care unit at many people there follow a Seventh-day Adventist kind of diet, and they do have a coronary care unit. And, she kind of shrugged it off like, don't be silly. Of course, yeah, there is. So if there were no coronary disease among vegans, I think that would be something worth touting and having a study just like this being funded and done. I haven't seen that that's been done, Mike. Maybe you can get the vegan folks to put together something on a shoestring. You might be able to only do it for $350,000 like these guys did, but you would want to get a communication group to put the PR in a better way. I agree.
This same group React, if vegans got together and crowdfunded a study and found that there was like increased plaque on this vegan diet and then just like completely ignored it and only reported weird secondary outcomes. And that's...
Well, I'd like to have that study done.
I'm going to keep the weird analogies going by modifying that old blind man elephant analogy in the sense that it's like these low-carb people, based off the information they're given, are blind people just touching the leg of an elephant and seeing a tree and going, this is just a harmless tree. But little do they know it's an elephant that's about to trample them. And that's what all of these more neutral doctors are trying to shout at them. But no hate to elephants, they're not obviously going to trample you, but that's just an analogy. Dr. Brad Stanfield also brings up the human aspect of this from his practice.
And I, again, see this in the clinic, where people are under the impression that if they're on a keto diet or they're a so-called lean mass hyperresponder, if they have high LDL cholesterol levels, that they don't necessarily need to worry about it because of some of the research and commentary around studies like this. And oftentimes I don't manage to make much headway because they've been following these influencers for a lot longer compared to a 15-minute consultation that I've got as a primary care doctor with the patient sitting in front.
Well, the idea of looking at triglyceride and HDL is not new. It's called metabolic syndrome. And I will pull that up with somebody in the office. I guess I'm an influencer, but I'm a doctor in the clinic too, Dr. Brad, that I'll show that in many cases, if not all, we're not talking about all, we're talking about individual variability, the triglyceride will have come down. And there are numerous studies about triglyceride and coronary heart disease in the context of eating carbohydrates. It's kind of been brushed under the rug there. Treatment with gemfibrozil and niacin and these drugs have kind of been pushed aside because of the emphasis on LDL treatment. So actually there were drugs to lower triglyceride and HDL in studies about that. So, but with the HDL going up, so I will pull the computer screen up and we'll look at the cholesterol over time. Although I prefer an NMR, I'll pull the screen up and look at the cholesterol over time, although I prefer an NMR lipoprofile if we can get it, because it shows the size of the LDL particle number, and that sort of thing, a little more detailed analysis. But many times the cholesterol actually looks better all across the board. And that's what happened in my first two patients 27 years ago. Their cholesterol levels got better. They wouldn't have been put on an LDL. And the idea that if it had gotten worse, I probably would never have done our first study. So just put, deep breath. Most people do not have increase in LDL, if that's the cause of heart disease, even when they do a keto diet. We're talking about a subset of these folks. Most people have an HDL elevation, and in these people, the lean mass hyperresponders were actually selected to have super high HDLs as well. And so I think it's reasonable to look at the triglyceride and HDL independently of the total and the LDL cholesterol as the old paradigm would have you. You look at the total and LDL and give a drug for it. That many doctors like Dr. Brad are in that camp. Well, that's the historical way to look at it. If you introduce a lifestyle change that actually reduces inflammation, which is thought to be the root cause of even the LDL causing a problem, that the triglyceride and HDL, the abdominal circumference, the blood sugar, and the blood pressure, called the metabolic syndrome, that this is a valid way to approach cardiometabolic risk. And I do think people can get serial CT scans and ultrasounds. They may have to pay out of pocket. I would love to see serial angiogram data, even calcium score data is pretty good. And the idea of having a screening test that looks at coronary calcium is kind of new to most cardiologists and to most family doctors and internists as well. And so those who are in charge of that coronary calcium world, and Dr. Budoff, who's in this study, is one of the leaders in that field. They recommend that if you are 50, 55 years old, especially if you have a history of heart disease in the family, that you get one of these calcium scores, regardless of what your food intake is, as a preventive screening measure. And so because we look at the blood in a different way, and we're treating a different metabolic syndrome, not the LDL cholesterol, the overlap really is actually the small LDL, and the triglyceride reduction fits both paradigms. So I think until more studies are done, there should be less don't do that and more, well, let's measure ourselves. Much like this situation I was in 25 years ago, doing 50 people, studying 50 people over 6 months on the Atkins diet, publishing a paper. It didn't mean that everyone should do it. It doesn't mean that it's great forever. It's a start. And to say, like people did, that, oh, it's only 6 months, it's 6 months in a day, they're going to be dying, hang on. We don't have that information yet. And the clinical grassroots signal is actually otherwise, that there are people living with high LDLs, they're not dying, and I know it goes against certain guidelines and a certain way of practicing medicine, but that's not new. Doctors practice differently. That's nothing new.
And this makes me wonder, do they really know the harm that they're doing? Yeah, if you dig deeper, you can find sort of slight warning statements like this one.
And we're also quite clear, like if you watch my video, I say very clearly, does this mean lean mass hyperresponders are immune to cardiovascular disease? No, it does not mean that.
Oh, well, that doesn't apply to these healthy lean mass hyperresponders, to which you are probably one kind of attitude. I think it's really irresponsible. Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that there are going to be people who have negative heart outcomes as a result of high LDL. Well, just going to the hospital believing that there's some magical lean mass hyperresponder that has heart disease invincibility from their LDL. Which brings me to the real bigger picture here, that meta-analyses we find on low-carb diets show up to a 30% increase in all-cause mortality.
Yeah, and that's not keto. That's the apples and oranges kind of thing. Even the keto, they say keto, but they're not really keto studies. The low carb, not even keto-ish.
And this is exactly the type of reason that is cited for that. In the end, there's just so much wrong with this study, starting with how their primary outcome wasn't even reported, very seemingly on purpose, because it was a horrible, worrisome number. Additionally, we have many doctors calling for an outright retraction.
So the mean wasn't in there based on a discussion I had with Dr. Sotomoto, because there was heterogeneity. A mean would hide that some people had regression, some people had progression, some people didn't change. And that was the point, as I understand it. Yeah, they should have been more organized in their delivery of the message. In fact, should have held on to data that were more solid. And it's going to be very interesting to see the next round of concerns when, yeah, some people, looks like they had some regression. And I totally agree, we need more studies of different diets. Mike, if you're going to claim that the vegan diet makes people immune from coronary disease, I'd love to see that information. I haven't seen that. And in the clinic, I've actually seen the opposite, where people think they're getting better and a vegan diet isn't the answer for them. It's not the right match. So again, I think we need to learn to match diets better for people. And the main issue that I saw addressed here is that people can have super high LDLs and be okay. That's novel. There's an anomaly if you believe LDL is going to cause death, especially at this high a level. Within a year, it just didn't happen. Even 2 years, it just didn't happen. So that's where Mike's saying, well, it might be 5, 10, 15 years. We don't know that yet. We don't.
Again, Dr. Anna Boric is And she uses an example of a study that was specifically retracted because it didn't report on its primary outcome, switched to a secondary one conveniently, and then the subsequent spin that occurred with these weird secondary outcomes, completely ignoring that, going on these carnivore channels, low-carb channels, and the mainstream media saying, oh, this study vindicates LDL. What the heck? And then the weird lack of communication between the authors, with Budoff saying that they were completely in the wrong by releasing that figure, which should have been the study, which they were going to then add to the study, which then they now say is not going to be changed. So yeah, you've heard from various doctors this keto CTA trial, or try again, is totally whack. Frankly, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology Advances needs to seriously review this, see what went wrong, what oversight was there, and at minimum, there needs to be a corrigendum, which is Latin for / a correction, and really the Journal of the American College of Cardiology proper going and releasing a straight up press statement saying that this study in one of their journals was absolutely misrepresented by the authors to a dishonest and irresponsible degree.
Yeah, typically journals don't get into the social media stuff around it. It's more of a what is published is what they'll stand behind. And even then, there are editors who have fallen out of the academic world who say that most of the things that were published weren't accurate or couldn't be replicated. So the main point here at the end, I think, is a great one, in that there should be now a established LDL belief group. Is that the LDL believers? I mean, who puts people on a keto diet to replicate how bad it is. And that kind of study would be funded almost immediately. I mean, so when I wrote papers and then also grants saying we're trying to look at the safety and efficacy, there was very little interest. But if you wrote a grant saying, the Atkins diet's going to kill you and there are all these people doing it, we need to study it to show how bad it is, that's where the funding's going to be. And so this should be, the vegans should get together as researchers, put people on, consult people who know what a keto diet is, please. When Professor Gardner did that at Stanford, they came up with some strange kind of keto diet that didn't replicate anything like what I do in my clinic. So there's a proper way to do keto or a difficult way to do it. So, but I find it fascinating, just stepping back, that the initial foray into studying people with super high LDLs had to be funded by a non-governmental, non-organizational group because of the belief system. The belief system is so strong, you would never consider studying this. And that's Dave Feldman's story about going around to the proper folks to try to get money to study this. They wouldn't do it. And so stay tuned. There's an anomaly here. Don't quite know the depth to which the anomaly exists. And it's not the end of the universe, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, if you're my patient, we talk about cardiometabolic risk. We talk about metabolic syndrome. We talk about measuring the arteries directly rather than a lot of the things that Mike's still kind of talking about. But that's kind of the old paradigm. It fits in with a diet that lowers LDL for the most part. Doesn't mean it's going to reduce or eliminate heart disease. So it'd be great to see a study with vegans and carnivores and Mediterranean diet followers. They have to prove that they're doing these studies. They have to prove that they're doing these diets and then follow them with the outcome of atherosclerosis by scan, but then also death and dying, whether there's morbidity, whether people have heart attacks or not, whether they have strokes. But I think we can get more information using these sophisticated scanners, not the one that they published there. So stay tuned for the next set of analyses, same data, same people, but a more sophisticated analysis that has been presented at San Diego by Dave Feldman and hopefully will be published soon. It's a lot of clucking about a pilot study, for sure. In the short run, measure yourself so that you know for sure. If you like this, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, look out for new content on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our YouTube membership for early access and exclusive live Q&As with me. Just click the join button below or support us with a PayPal in the description.